The iron bars felt cold against Zara Remington's palms as she gripped them, staring out at the dusty main street of Deadwood, South Dakota, watching the July sun beat down mercilessly on the wooden boardwalks. The year was 1878, and she had been locked in this jail cell for 3 days now, accused of stealing $1,500 from the Deadwood Bank and Trust, a crime she had never committed, would never even dream of committing. Yet here she sat with her freedom stripped away and her reputation destroyed. She had arrived in Deadwood only 2 months prior, a young woman of 21, seeking a fresh start after her father's death, left her with nothing but debts back in Philadelphia. The town was rough, wild, filled with miners and gamblers and men who lived by their own codes, but Zara had found work as a seamstress in Mrs. Henderson's dress shop, earning honest money and keeping to herself. She had never caused trouble, never given anyone reason to look at her sideways, yet when that money went missing from the bank vault last Tuesday morning, the sheriff had come straight to her boarding house and dragged her out in front of everyone. The evidence against her seemed damning. Someone had seen a woman matching her description near the bank at dawn. A deposit slip with her name on it had been found torn up in the alley behind the building. Most damning of all, a small leather pouch containing $200 in gold coins had been discovered hidden beneath the floorboards of her room. She had never seen that money before in her life, had no idea how it got there, but her protests fell on deaf ears. The bank owner, Howard Clarence, a portly man with a thick mustache and eyes like chips of flint, had pointed his finger at her in the sheriff's office and declared her a thief, and that had been enough. Now she faced trial in 2 days, and everyone in town had already decided her guilt. She would hang, or at best, spend the next 20 years breaking rocks in a territorial prison. The injustice of it burned in her chest like hot coals, but what could she do? She was alone, friendless in this harsh town, with no one to speak for her and no way to prove her innocence. The sound of boots on the wooden boardwalk made her look up. A man was walking toward the jail, tall and lean with broad shoulders and a confident stride. He wore dusty brown trousers, a work shirt rolled up at the sleeves, and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. As he climbed the steps to the sheriff's office, she caught a glimpse of sharp features, a strong jaw, and eyes the color of creek water. He looked to be in his mid-20s, and there was something purposeful in the way he moved, like a man on a mission. She heard voices inside, the low rumble of men talking, though she could not make out the words. Sheriff Dalton was in there, probably playing cards with his deputies, as he had been doing for the past 3 days, more interested in his poker hand than justice. The stranger's voice cut through the others, firm and insistent, and she pressed closer to the bars, straining to hear. "I am telling you, something does not add up about this case," the stranger said, his voice carrying a hint of Texas in its drawl. "I have been looking into it, and there are too many loose ends." "This is not your concern, Parker," Sheriff Dalton replied, irritation evident in his tone. "The woman is guilty. We have evidence." "Evidence that could have been planted," the stranger Parker shot back. "Have you even investigated anyone else? Questioned where that money might actually be?" "We found $200 in her room. That is good enough for me." 200 out of 1,500. "Where is the rest? And why would she hide such a small portion under her own floorboards where anyone could find it? That makes no sense." Zara's heart began to pound. Someone was questioning her guilt, actually thinking about the holes in the case against her. She had tried to point out these same inconsistencies, but the sheriff had not listened to her. Maybe he would listen to this man. "Look, Parker," the sheriff said, his voice dropping lower, more threatening. "You are new to Deadwood. You have been here, what, a week? Working odd jobs at the lumber mill? You do not know how things work in this town. Howard Clarence wants justice, and we are giving it to him. The girl hangs, and that is the end of it. Justice or revenge?" Parker's voice was cold now. "Because from where I stand, it looks like you are more interested in pleasing a rich man than finding the truth." There was a long silence, and Zara held her breath. Then she heard the scrape of a chair, heavy footsteps, And suddenly, Sheriff Dalton was standing in the doorway to the cell area, his face red with anger. Behind him stood Parker, and up close, Zara could see him more clearly. He was handsome in a rough, weathered way, with sun-darkened skin and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. His eyes, that striking greenish blue, fixed on her through the bars, and something passed between them, a spark of recognition, though they had never met before. "You want to help her so bad, Parker?" "Fine." "You have until the trial to find something that proves her innocence," the sheriff said, though his tone suggested he thought it was impossible. "But when you come up empty, I do not want to hear another word about it." "Understood?" "Understood," Parker said, never taking his eyes off Zara. The sheriff stalked back into his office, slamming the door behind him. Parker stepped closer to the cell, pulling off his hat and running a hand through dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Miss Remington," he said quietly, "my name is Preston Parker. I want to help you." "Why?" The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "You do not know me." "No, but I know injustice when I see it." He crouched down so they were at eye level, his gaze intense and sincere. "I have been in Deadwood for a week, working at the mill, keeping my head down, but I hear things. People talk, and everything I have heard about you says you are honest, hardworking, that you keep to yourself and do not cause trouble. That does not sound like someone who would rob a bank." Tears pricked at Zara's eyes, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough over the past 3 days. "No one else believes that." "I believe it," Preston said firmly, "and I am going to prove it. But I need your help. I need you to tell me everything, from the beginning, every detail, no matter how small." So she did. She told him about arriving in Deadwood, about her work at the dress shop, about her simple life in the boarding house. She told him about the morning she had been arrested, how she had been walking to work when the sheriff grabbed her, how confused and terrified she had been. She described the deposit slip with her name on it, though she swore she had never written it, and the money under her floorboards that she had never seen before. Preston listened intently, asking questions, making mental notes. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, his brow furrowed in thought. "The deposit slip," he said finally. "Do you remember making any deposits at the bank?" "I made one about 3 weeks ago. I had saved up some money and wanted to put it somewhere safe, but I only deposited $30, and I still have the receipt for it." "Do you have the receipt with you?" "It is in my room at the boarding house, in the drawer of the small table by my bed." Preston nodded. "I will get it. What else can you tell me about that day you made the deposit? Did you notice anything unusual? Anyone paying particular attention to you?" Zara thought back, trying to remember. "There was a woman there, waiting in line behind me. She seemed nervous, kept fidgeting with her reticule. I remember thinking it was odd because she left before conducting any business. Just walked out suddenly." "Can you describe her?" "Blonde hair, petite, wearing a green dress with black trim." I had never seen her before. Preston's eyes sharpened. "That is good. That is very good. Anything else?" "The bank clerk who helped me, his name was Timothy. Timothy Walsh. He was friendly, chatty, asked me about my work, where I was from. At the time, I thought he was just being polite." "Maybe he was gathering information," Preston said grimly. He stood up, settling his hat back on his head. "I'm going to start digging, Miss Remington. I am going to find out who really stole that money, and I am going to clear your name." "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, needing to understand. "You do not even know me." Preston looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression made her heart skip. "Let us just say I have seen too many innocent people suffer because no one stood up for them. I am not letting that happen again." He turned to leave, but she called out to him. "Preston?" He looked back. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You are the first person who has believed me." A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Hold on to hope, Zara. I am not going to let you down. Then he was gone, his boots echoing on the wooden floor, and Zara was alone again. But this time, the crushing weight of despair had lifted slightly. Someone was fighting for her. Someone believed in her innocence. And as she watched Preston's tall figure stride down the main street through her barred window, she felt something she had not felt in days: hope. Preston spent the rest of the day asking questions, moving through Deadwood like a man on a mission. He started at the boarding house where Zara had lived, a narrow two-story building run by a sour-faced widow named Mrs. Copeland. The woman was initially reluctant to let him into Zara's room, but when he explained he was investigating the case, she relented with a disapproving sniff. Always knew that girl would bring trouble, Mrs. Copeland muttered as she unlocked the door. Too pretty for her own good. Girls like that always end up causing problems. Preston bit back a sharp retort and stepped into the small room. It was sparse but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a trunk for clothes, and the small table Zara had mentioned. He opened the drawer and found the deposit receipt right where she said it would be. $30 deposited 3 weeks ago, signed by Timothy Walsh. He pocketed the receipt and examined the room more carefully. The floorboards where the money had been found were still pulled up, the nails removed. He knelt down and studied the wood. The nail holes looked fresh, the wood around them not worn or aged. Someone had pulled these boards up recently and replaced them, making it look like a long-established hiding spot. "When did you find the money?" he asked Mrs. Copeland, who was hovering in the doorway. "The sheriff found it, day after the robbery. He came here with a warrant, searched every room in the house, found it under her floor. And you never noticed anything unusual before that? No one coming or going from her room when she was not here?" Mrs. Copeland pursed her lips. "I do not spy on my boarders, young man." "Of course not. But you notice things. It is your house. You would know if someone who did not belong was here." She was silent for a moment, then grudgingly admitted, "There was a man here 2 days before the robbery. Came to the door asking for Miss Remington. I told him she was at work, and he said he would wait. I left him in the parlor while I went to tend to laundry, but when I came back, he was gone. I thought maybe he had gotten tired of waiting." Preston's pulse quickened. "Can you describe this man?" "Average height, thin build, had a nervous way about him, kept looking around like he expected trouble. Brown hair, clean shaven. Wore a brown suit, a bit threadbare." "Would you recognize him if you saw him again?" "Maybe. I am not certain." Preston thanked her and left, his mind racing. Someone had been in the boarding house 2 days before the robbery, asking for Zara. That same someone could have easily planted the money under her floorboards, but who and why? His next stop was the bank. The Deadwood Bank and Trust was an imposing brick building, one of the few permanent structures in a town dominated by wooden storefronts. Inside, it was cool and dim, with bars on the windows and a large vault door visible behind the teller counter. Timothy Walsh was there, a young man in his early 20s with slicked back hair and a pleasant face. He looked up as Preston approached. "Can I help you, sir?" Timothy asked with a professional smile. "I hope so. My name is Preston Parker. I am looking into the robbery that happened last week." The smile faltered. "That has already been solved. The woman who did it is in jail. Maybe. But I have some questions. You helped Miss Remington with a deposit a few weeks back, did you not?" Timothy's expression grew wary. "I help a lot of customers." Preston placed the receipt on the counter. "This was signed by you. Do you remember her?" Timothy barely glanced at it. "Vaguely. Like I said, I help a lot of people." "The deposit slip with her name on it that was found torn up behind the bank, did you see it? Was it in her handwriting?" "I do not know her handwriting." "But you filled out her deposit slip when she made this transaction, correct? So you would have seen her write her name at least once." "I suppose." So did the torn slip look like it was written by the same person? Timothy's jaw tightened. I am not a handwriting expert. Now, if you will excuse me, I have work to do. He turned away, but Preston was not finished. One more thing. Do you know a blonde woman, petite, who might have been in the bank the same day Miss Remington made her deposit? She left suddenly without conducting business. For just a moment, something flickered in Timothy's eyes. Fear. Guilt. But then it was gone, replaced by a mask of polite indifference. I do not recall anyone like that. Good day, sir. Preston left the bank with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. Timothy Walsh was hiding something. The young teller had been nervous, evasive, and he had practically run away from Preston's questions about the blonde woman. There was a connection there. Preston was sure of it. He spent the evening in the saloon, nursing a whiskey and listening to the conversations around him. Deadwood was a gossipy town, and people loved to talk. He heard plenty about the robbery, about Zara, about how the trial was a foregone conclusion. But he also heard something else, something that made his ears perk up. Heard Howard Clarence is mighty pleased with himself. One miner said to his companion. Got his money back and got the thief behind bars. Everything tied up neat and tidy. Got his money back? Preston interjected, leaning over from the next table. I thought only $200 was recovered. The miner looked at him with bleary eyes. That is what I heard too at first. But word is, Clarence got a big deposit just yesterday. $1,300 right back into his account. Anonymous, they say. Preston felt a chill run down his spine. $1,300. The exact amount still missing from the robbery. Someone had returned the money anonymously, which meant the real thief was still out there, and they had just made a major mistake. He downed the rest of his whiskey and headed straight back to the sheriff's office. Dalton was there, feet up on his desk, picking his teeth with a splinter of wood. What now, Parker? The sheriff asked with exasperation. Did you know that the missing money was returned to the bank yesterday? Dalton's feet dropped to the floor. What are you talking about? $1,300 was deposited anonymously into the bank's account yesterday. The exact amount that was still missing. The sheriff's face went through several expressions, finally settling on annoyed confusion. So, if Zara Remington stole the money, why would she return it? She is sitting in jail, facing the gallows. What possible reason would she have to give it back? And how could she, locked up as she is? Maybe she had an accomplice. Or maybe she never took it in the first place, and the real thief is having a crisis of conscience. Either way, this proves there is more to this case than you think. Sheriff Dalton stood up, his face darkening. Or maybe you are grasping at straws because you have a soft spot for a pretty face. The girl is guilty, Parker. The trial is tomorrow, and she will be convicted. Now get out of my office. Preston held his ground. I want to see the deposit records from yesterday. That is public information. Come back with a judge's order. I will do better than that. I will go straight to Howard Clarence and ask him myself. He turned on his heel and left before the sheriff could stop him. It was getting dark, but the bank owner's house was only a few streets away, a large white structure that stood out among Deadwood's rougher buildings. Preston knocked firmly on the door, and after a moment a servant answered. I need to speak with Mr. Clarence. It is about the bank robbery. Mr. Clarence is at dinner. This cannot wait. The servant looked uncertain, but then Clarence himself appeared in the hallway, napkin still tucked into his collar. What is all this commotion? Preston removed his hat respectfully. Mr. Clarence, my name is Preston Parker. I am looking into the bank robbery, and I need to ask you about a deposit made yesterday. $1,300 returned anonymously. Clarence's expression went carefully blank. I do not discuss the bank's business with strangers. Even when it concerns a woman's life, Zara Remington is going to hang for a crime she did not commit. The evidence says otherwise. The evidence was planted, and that money being returned proves it. Why would the thief give back the money? Why go through all the trouble of framing Miss Remington if they plan to return it anyway? Clarence's jaw worked, and for a moment, Preston thought he saw something like uncertainty in the older man's eyes, but then he straightened his shoulders and said coldly, I have no idea what you are talking about. No money was returned to the bank. Now leave my property before I have the sheriff arrest you for harassment. He slammed the door in Preston's face. Preston stood there, staring at the closed door, his mind working furiously. Clarence had just lied to him, directly and obviously. The miner in the saloon had heard about the returned money, which meant it was common knowledge, yet Clarence was denying it happened. Why? What did he have to hide? Unless he was involved somehow. Unless this whole thing was not about the theft at all, but about something else entirely. Preston walked slowly back toward the center of town, turning the pieces over in his mind. A bank robbery where only a small portion of the money was found, planted in the accused's room. A deposit slip that did not match the accused's earlier handwriting. A nervous bank clerk who would not answer questions. A mysterious blonde woman who had acted strangely. And now the money returned anonymously, while the bank owner denied it even happened. Nothing about this added up to Zara being guilty. Everything pointed to an elaborate frame job. But why? What had Zara done to deserve this? Who wanted her out of the way badly enough to see her hang? He was so lost in thought that he almost ran into a woman coming out of the general store. She stumbled, and he reached out to steady her, apologizing. Then he got a good look at her face, and his breath caught. Blonde hair, petite build, and she was wearing a green dress with black trim, though it was clearly old and faded, probably her only nice dress. Excuse me, miss, he said quickly before she could walk away. Do you have a moment? She looked nervous, just like Mrs. Copeland had described the woman in the boarding house. I am sorry, I have to go. Please, I just want to ask you about the bank robbery. I think you might have information that could help. Her eyes widened with fear, and she tried to pull away, but Preston kept a gentle but firm grip on her arm. I am not accusing you of anything. I just need to understand what happened. A woman's life depends on it. I do not know anything, she said, but her voice was shaking. You were in the bank 3 weeks ago, standing behind Zara Remington. You left suddenly before your turn. Why? I do not. Please, Preston said softly. If you know something, anything, you need to tell me. Zara is going to hang tomorrow for something she did not do. Can you live with that on your conscience? The woman's face crumpled, and tears began to stream down her cheeks. I did not know they would blame her. I swear I did not know. Timothy said it was just going to be a simple plan, that no one would get hurt. Preston's heart began to race. Timothy Walsh, the bank clerk? She nodded miserably. He is my brother. He got himself into debt. Bad debt. To some men from Denver. They were going to kill him if he did not pay up. He was desperate. He came to me with this plan, said he could take money from the bank, make it look like someone else did it, and we could pay off his debts. I told him it was wrong, told him not to do it, but he did not listen. So he stole the money and framed Zara. He made me go to the bank that day, said I needed to watch that woman, see how she signed her name, what she looked like. Then he used that information to make it look like she did it. He snuck into her boarding house and planted some of the money there. He thought it was foolproof. But then you convinced him to return the money. She looked up at Preston with red, swollen eyes. I could not sleep, could not eat. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that woman's face. Timothy felt terrible, too, once he realized she was going to hang. We thought if we returned the money, maybe they would realize she was innocent. But it did not work. The sheriff still thinks she is guilty, and the trial is tomorrow. Preston's mind was racing ahead, piecing together the full picture. The sheriff does not care about the truth because someone is paying him to look the other way. That is why he would not listen to anything I said. But who? Who benefits from Zara hanging? The woman shook her head. I do not know. Timothy never mentioned anyone else. I need you to come with me to the sheriff. I need you to tell him what you just told me. Fear flashed across her face. Timothy will go to jail. He committed a crime, but if you both come forward now, testify to what really happened, the judge might show leniency, and you will be saving an innocent woman's life. She hesitated, torn between loyalty to her brother and the weight of her guilty conscience. Preston waited, letting her work through it. Finally, she nodded slowly. All right, I will do it, but I need to talk to Timothy first. He needs to be the one to confess. Where is he now? At home, probably. We share a small house on the east edge of town. Take me there. They walked together through the darkening streets, the woman, whose name was Lillian, telling Preston more about her brother's gambling debts and desperate choices. By the time they reached the small, run-down house, Preston had a fuller picture of what had happened. Timothy Walsh was not a bad man, just a foolish one who had made terrible decisions under pressure. Lillian knocked on the door, and after a moment, Timothy opened it. His face went white when he saw Preston standing there. Hello, Timothy, Preston said calmly. I think we need to have a conversation. Timothy tried to slam the door, but Preston was faster, shoving his boot into the gap and pushing his way inside. The house was tiny, just 2 rooms, and there was nowhere for Timothy to run. He backed up against the far wall, hands raised defensively. I did not mean for anyone to get hurt, he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. It was supposed to be simple. Take the money, pay off my debts, return what was left. I never thought they would actually convict her. But you were willing to let them try, Preston said, anger coloring his voice. You were willing to let an innocent woman hang to save your own skin. I was scared, Timothy shouted. Those men from Denver, they would have killed me. You do not understand what it is like to have that kind of fear hanging over you. No, but I understand what it is like to be accused of something you did not do, to have everyone turn against you based on lies. Zara understands that too, because she has been living it for the past 3 days. Timothy sank down onto a chair, his head in his hands. I wanted to confess. After I returned the money, I thought maybe that would be enough, but Clarence would not acknowledge it. He acted like it never happened. Why would he do that? Preston pressed. What does he gain from Zara being convicted? I do not know, but there is something else. Timothy looked up, his face haggard. The day after the robbery, Clarence came to me privately. He told me if I kept my mouth shut and let the blame fall on that seamstress girl, he would forgive a loan my father had taken out before he died. $500, which I was supposed to be paying back. He said if I talked, he would ruin me. There it was, the missing piece. Clarence was not just covering up the crime, he was actively ensuring Zara took the fall. But why? What had she done to make him want her destroyed? We are going to the sheriff, Preston said firmly. All 3 of us. You are going to confess everything, and Lillian is going to corroborate your story. And if Clarence tries to stop us, we will go straight to the territorial judge. Timothy looked at his sister, who nodded encouragingly. Then he took a deep breath and stood up. All right, let us go. The walk back to the sheriff's office felt like it took forever, though it could not have been more than 10 minutes. The streets were quieter now, most of the townsfolk inside, having supper or drinking in the saloons. Preston kept a careful eye on Timothy, making sure he did not bolt, but the young man seemed resigned to his fate now, shoulders slumped in defeat. Sheriff Dalton was not happy to see them, especially when Preston explained why they were there. But as Timothy began to confess, laying out the entire scheme in halting, shame-filled words, even the crooked sheriff could not ignore the truth anymore. Timothy had stolen the money. He had framed Zara, and Howard Clarence had helped cover it up. This changes everything, Preston said when Timothy finished. You have to release Zara immediately and arrest Clarence. But Dalton was shaking his head, a calculating look in his eyes. This is a serious accusation. I cannot just arrest one of the most powerful men in Deadwood based on the word of a confessed thief. He has no reason to lie about Clarence's involvement now. He is already admitting to the robbery. Still, I need more proof. Preston wanted to punch the man. He could see Dalton was stalling, probably trying to figure out how to warn Clarence and keep his own involvement hidden. But before he could argue further, a commotion outside drew their attention. Angry voices, the sound of boots on wood, and then the door burst open. A crowd of men pushed their way into the office, led by Howard Clarence himself. The bank owner's face was red with fury, and he pointed a shaking finger at Timothy. "That is him! That is the man who stole from my bank!" Clarence shouted. "Arrest him immediately!" Preston stepped forward. "He is already under arrest, Clarence, and he has told us some very interesting things about your involvement." Clarence's eyes narrowed. "My involvement? I am the victim here." "Really? Because according to Timothy, you bribed him to keep quiet and let Zara Remington take the fall for his crime. Why would you do that unless you had your own reasons for wanting her convicted?" The room went silent. Everyone was staring at Clarence, waiting for his response. The banker's face cycled through several expressions: shock, anger, fear, before settling on cold contempt. "That is a lie. This boy is trying to drag me down with him." "Then why did you deny that the stolen money was returned?" Preston challenged. "Multiple people heard about that deposit, yet you told me it never happened. What are you hiding?" "I do not have to answer to you," Clarence spat. "You are nobody, just some drifter who has been in town for a week. Stay out of things that do not concern you. An innocent woman's life concerns me." "She's not innocent. She's a whore just like her mother before her." The words hung in the air like poison. Preston felt his hands clench into fists, but before he could respond, Lillian spoke up, her voice trembling but clear. "That is what this is really about, is it not? You do not care about the money. You wanted her to hang because of something personal." Clarence whirled on her. "Shut your mouth, girl." "No," Lillian said, gaining strength. "You wanted revenge on her for something. What did she do to you? What could a seamstress possibly have done to make you hate her so much?" For a long moment, Clarence just stared at her, his chest heaving. Then, to everyone's shock, he laughed, a bitter, ugly sound. "Do you want to know the truth? Fine, I will tell you. That woman's mother destroyed my life 20 years ago. Zara Remington was promised to me, was going to be my wife. But then she met some smooth-talking gambler from back east and ran off with him instead, leaving me humiliated in front of everyone. She sent me one letter years later, telling me how happy she was, how she had a daughter. She wanted me to know she had never regretted her choice." He paused, breathing hard, lost in old memories and ancient rage. "When I saw her daughter walk into my bank 2 months ago, I knew who she was immediately. Same face, same eyes, same way of carrying herself. It was like Sarah had come back to haunt me. And I realized I had been given a chance to finally make that family pay for what they did to me." The confession poured out of him now, weeks of carefully maintained control cracking apart. "So when Timothy came to me, panicked about what he had done, I saw an opportunity. I told him I would protect him if he stayed quiet, and I made sure all the evidence pointed to Sarah's daughter. I wanted her to suffer. I wanted her to know what it felt like to lose everything." The room erupted. Men were shouting, some in disgust, others in disbelief. Sheriff Dalton looked like he wanted to crawl under his desk, and Preston just stood there, absorbing the magnitude of what had just been revealed. A woman had nearly died because a bitter man could not let go of a grudge from 2 decades ago. "Sheriff," Preston said, his voice cutting through the chaos, "I believe you have more than enough evidence to arrest Howard Clarence now." Dalton, seeing no way out, reluctantly nodded. "Howard Clarence, you are under arrest for conspiracy and obstruction of justice, and Ms. Zara Remington is hereby released." Preston did not wait another moment. He strode to the cell area, found the key hanging on the wall, and unlocked Zara's cell. She stood there, pressed against the far wall, clearly having heard everything through the doorway. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes were bright with disbelief and hope. "You are free," Preston said softly. "It is over." She took a tentative step forward, then another, as if afraid the floor might disappear beneath her feet. Then she was rushing to him, and Preston caught her in his arms as she broke down sobbing. He held her close, feeling her body shake with the force of her emotions, and something inside his chest cracked open. This woman, who had suffered so much, who had been so strong through all of it, was finally safe, and he had been the one to save her. They stood like that for a long time, oblivious to the chaos still unfolding in the sheriff's office. Preston murmured soothing words, ran his hand over her hair, let her cry out all the fear and pain and relief. When she finally pulled back, looking up at him with red-rimmed eyes, she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved my life." "I just found the truth," he said, his thumb brushing away a tear on her cheek. "You saved yourself by being exactly who you are, someone worth believing in." A smile broke across her face, tentative but genuine, and Preston felt his heart stutter in his chest. He had known her for less than a day, had spoken to her only a handful of times, but in that moment he knew with absolute certainty that he was falling for her. The next few days were a blur of activity. Howard Clarence was formally charged and locked in the very cell Zara had occupied. Timothy Walsh was also charged, though his cooperation and obvious remorse earned him some sympathy from the judge. Lillian was not charged at all, as she had not participated in the crime and had ultimately helped bring the truth to light. Sheriff Dalton was investigated for corruption, and while nothing could be directly proven, he resigned in disgrace and left Deadwood. Through it all, Preston stayed close to Zara, helping her navigate the legal aftermath, making sure she was all right. She had returned to her room at the boarding house, but Mrs. Copeland's treatment of her had not improved, so Preston helped her find new lodgings at a different house run by a kind widow named Mrs. Patterson. They spent hours together, talking about everything and nothing. Zara told him about her life in Philadelphia, about her father's slow decline from illness, and the debts that had consumed everything they owned. She talked about her mother, who had died when Zara was young, and how she barely remembered her except for a feeling of warmth and laughter. Preston shared his own story in return. He had grown up in Texas on a small ranch, the youngest of three brothers. When his father died, the ranch had gone to the eldest, as was tradition, and Preston had struck out on his own to make his way in the world. He had worked as a ranch hand, a miner, a lumber mill worker, drifting from town to town, never quite finding a place where he belonged. "Why did you come to Deadwood?" Zara asked one afternoon as they sat on a bench outside the general store, watching the traffic of the main street. Preston was quiet for a moment, considering his answer. "I heard there was work here, and I needed money. But honestly, I have been asking myself that same question since I arrived. I have been to a dozen towns just like this one, never stayed more than a few weeks in any of them. But Deadwood feels different somehow." "Different how?" He looked at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "I think maybe I was meant to come here, meant to meet you." Zara felt heat rise in her cheeks. Over the past days, she had become increasingly aware of Preston not just as her savior, but as a man. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the strength in his hands, the sound of his voice. She found herself thinking about him at night when she should have been sleeping, wondering what it would be like to kiss him. But she also felt uncertain. So much had happened so quickly, and her emotions were still raw from the ordeal. Was what she felt real, or was it just gratitude and relief twisted into something resembling attraction? As if sensing her thoughts, Preston reached over and took her hand, his fingers warm and rough against hers. "I know the timing is not ideal," he said quietly. "You have been through hell, and the last thing you need is some cowboy confusing things further. But I need you to know that what I feel is real. I care about you, Zara, more than I have ever cared about anyone." Her heart was pounding so hard, she thought he must be able to hear it. "I care about you too," she admitted. "But I am scared. Everything in my life has fallen apart so many times. What if this is just another thing that ends badly? Or what if it is the thing that finally goes right?" Preston countered gently. "I am not asking you to make any promises, Zara. I just want a chance to see where this goes. No pressure, no expectations, just you and me, taking things one day at a time." She looked into his eyes and saw nothing but sincerity and hope. This man had risked so much for her, had fought for her when no one else would. And in doing so, he had shown her that not all people were cruel, that there was still kindness and courage in the world. How could she not give him a chance? "One day at a time," she agreed softly, and his answering smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. The trial was held a week later, and it was mercifully swift. With Timothy's confession and Clarence's damning admission witnessed by a roomful of people, there was no question of guilt. Clarence was sentenced to 10 years in territorial prison, a harsh punishment that left him a broken man. Timothy received 5 years, though the judge recommended he be allowed to work off his sentence through labor rather than hard imprisonment. Zara was formally exonerated, her name cleared in the eyes of the law and the town. In the aftermath, something shifted in Deadwood. People who had been quick to judge Zara now looked at her with sympathy and respect. Mrs. Henderson rehired her at the dress shop with a raise in pay and an apology for not standing by her during the accusations. The new sheriff, a fair-minded man named William Gray, who had been a deputy in a nearby town, made a point of introducing himself and assuring her that justice would be properly served going forward. But more than anything, Zara's world now revolved around Preston. They were together constantly, and with each passing day, her feelings for him deepened. He made her laugh with stories of his travels. He listened when she needed to talk about her fears and grief. He held her when the nightmares came, whispering that she was safe, that he would never let anyone hurt her again. And slowly, carefully, they explored the growing attraction between them. A held hand became linked arms. Linked arms became his hand at the small of her back as they walked. That became stolen moments in quiet corners, soft kisses that left them both breathless and wanting more. One evening, about 3 weeks after the trial, Preston took her on a walk up into the hills above Deadwood. It was August now, and the summer air was warm and heavy with the scent of pine. They climbed until they could see the whole town spread out below them, lights beginning to twinkle as the sun set in a blaze of orange and gold. "It is beautiful up here," Zara said, slightly breathless from the climb. "Not as beautiful as you," Preston replied. And though the line was simple, the way he said it made her heart flutter. She turned to face him, and the look in his eyes took her breath away. There was desire there, yes, but also something deeper, something that spoke of permanence and promise. "Preston, she started, but he shook his head. "Let me say this first," he said, taking both her hands in his. "I have been drifting for years, Zara, never putting down roots, never letting myself care too much about any place or any person. I told myself I was free, that I liked the adventure of never knowing where I would be next, but the truth is I was lonely. I was searching for something without even knowing what it was." He paused, his thumbs stroking over her knuckles. "And then I came to Deadwood, and I saw you in that cell, and something inside me just knew. This was what I had been searching for. You. I know it is fast. I know we have not known each other long. But I am not a man who lies to himself or plays games. I love you, Zara Remington. I am completely, hopelessly in love with you." Tears spilled down Zara's cheeks, but these were tears of joy. All the fear and uncertainty melted away, leaving only the truth of what she felt. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not think I would ever feel this way about anyone, but you have given me so much. You gave me my freedom, my faith in goodness, And now you are giving me your heart. I love you, Preston Parker." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and Zara felt like she was flying. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and she melted into him, her hands sliding up to tangle in his hair. The kiss went on, slow and sweet and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were trembling. "Marry me," Preston said, the words tumbling out like he could not hold them back. "I know it is crazy, but marry me, Zara. Be my wife. Let me spend the rest of my life making you happy." She laughed, a sound of pure delight. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." He swept her up in his arms, spinning her around as she shrieked with laughter, and then they were kissing again, both of them grinning so hard they could barely manage it properly. By the time they made their way back down the hill, full darkness had fallen, but Zara felt like she was glowing from the inside out. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church on the edge of Deadwood. Zara wore a dress she had made herself, pale blue with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Preston wore his best clothes, which were not fancy but clean and well fitted, and when he saw her walking down the aisle toward him, his eyes filled with tears. Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Patterson were there, along with Lillian Walsh, who had become a friend to Zara in the wake of everything. A handful of townspeople came as well, miners and shopkeepers who had come to respect the young couple. Even the new sheriff attended, standing in the back with his hat in his hands. The Reverend kept the ceremony short and sweet, and when he pronounced them husband and wife, Preston kissed Zara with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance sighed audibly. They walked out of the church hand in hand, grinning at each other like fools, and the small crowd threw rice and shouted congratulations. They had rented a tiny house on the outskirts of town, just 2 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs. Preston had found steady work at a ranch outside Deadwood, managing cattle and breaking horses, work he was good at and enjoyed. Zara continued at the dress shop, but began taking on private commissions as well, her skill with a needle becoming well known. They were not rich, but they had enough, and more importantly, they had each other. The first months of marriage were blissful. They learned each other's rhythms, the little habits and preferences that make up a shared life. Preston learned that Zara liked to sleep with the window open, even when it was cold, and that she hummed while she sewed. Zara discovered that Preston was an early riser who liked to watch the sun come up with a cup of coffee, and that he had a terrible singing voice, but sang anyway when he was happy. They talked about everything, their pasts, and their hopes for the future. Preston told her about his brothers, wondering aloud if he should write to them, let them know he had settled down. Zara encouraged him to do so, knowing that family was important even when it was complicated. She talked about her mother more, trying to remember the woman who had been so briefly in her life, and Preston listened without judgment, understanding that she needed to make peace with the past. They made love with a passion that sometimes surprised them both. In the darkness of their bedroom, with the curtains drawn and the world shut out, they explored each other with hands and mouths and whispered words. Zara had been nervous the first time, inexperienced and afraid of doing something wrong, but Preston had been patient and gentle, guiding her, showing her pleasure she had not known existed. And as her confidence grew, so did her boldness, until they met as equals, giving and taking with abandon. Life was not perfect. There were hard days when work was exhausting and money was tight. There were moments of frustration when they got on each other's nerves, when Preston's stubborn streak clashed with Zara's independent nature. But they learned to talk through their disagreements, to compromise and forgive, to remember that they were on the same team. Winter came, and with it, snow that blanketed Deadwood in white. The house was cold, despite their best efforts to insulate it, and they spent long evenings huddled together by the fire, sharing warmth and stories. Christmas was simple but joyful. Zara made Preston a new shirt, the stitching so fine it looked like machine work, and he gave her a locket he had saved up for months to buy, with space inside for two small photographs. "For our children," he had said when he fastened it around her neck, "when we have them." Zara had pressed her hand over the locket, over her heart. They had talked about children, about wanting a family, but so far it had not happened. She tried not to worry, told herself they had plenty of time, but sometimes she wondered if her body had been damaged somehow by the stress of the false accusations and trial. Spring came, bringing warmer weather and new opportunities. Preston's boss at the ranch, impressed with his work ethic and skill with horses, offered him a partnership. With a loan from the bank, they could buy into a portion of the land and start building their own herd. It was a risk, a huge commitment, but it was also a chance to build something lasting. They talked about it for days, weighing the pros and cons. The loan would put them in debt for years. They would have to work harder than ever, with no guarantee of success. But they would be building their own future, creating something to pass down to their children. In the end, it was Zara who made the decision. "We take the risk," she said firmly. "We have already been through the worst that life can throw at us. We survived it, together. Whatever comes next, we can handle it." So they took the loan, signed the partnership papers, and became part owners of the Running Creek Ranch. The work was backbreaking. Preston spent long days in the saddle, rounding up cattle, mending fences, breaking wild horses to the bridle. Zara took on more sewing work, saving every penny she could, and also learned to help with the ranch work, feeding animals, gathering eggs, tending the vegetable garden they had planted. They fell into bed exhausted every night but satisfied, knowing they were building something real. And slowly the ranch began to thrive. Their portion of the herd grew. They bought more land. Preston gained a reputation as one of the best horsemen in the territory, and people came from miles around to buy horses he had trained. It was in the midst of all this hard work and progress that Zara realized she was pregnant. At first, she thought she was just tired from all the labor, but when her monthly courses did not come, and then did not come again, she began to suspect. A visit to the doctor in town confirmed it. She was nearly 3 months along, due in late autumn. She told Preston that night after supper, simply and directly, "I am going to have a baby." For a moment, he just stared at her, his fork frozen halfway to his mouth. Then a grin spread across his face, so wide and joyful it was almost blinding. He dropped the fork, pushed back from the table, and swept her into his arms, spinning her around just like he had that night on the hill above Deadwood. "We are having a baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Zara, we are going to be parents." She laughed and cried at the same time, holding tight to him, feeling the solid reality of their love and their life together. All the pain of the past, all the injustice and fear and suffering had led them here, to this moment, to this joy. The pregnancy was not easy. Summer heat made Zara nauseous and tired, and she had to cut back on her sewing work as her belly grew. But Preston was attentive and loving, bringing her cool drinks, rubbing her swollen feet, talking to her belly, and telling their unborn child stories about the ranch and the mountains and the life they would have together. In October, when the leaves were turning gold and red, Zara went into labor. It was long and difficult, hours of pain that left her exhausted and terrified. But Mrs. Patterson was there, acting as midwife, and Preston held her hand through it all, whispering encouragement and love. Finally, as the sun was setting, their son was born. He came into the world with a lusty cry, his tiny fists waving, and when the midwife placed him in Zara's arms, she felt a love so overwhelming it stole her breath. He was perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that would eventually turn the same blue-green as his father's. "What should we name him?" Preston asked, his voice rough with emotion as he looked down at his son. Zara thought for a moment, then smiled. "James. James Preston Parker." "James," Preston repeated, testing the name. "I like it. Hello, James. Welcome to the world, son." The baby's eyes opened, seeming to focus on his father's face, And in that moment, Zara saw the future stretching out before them. Not an easy future, but a good one, full of love and work and the satisfaction of building something that would last. The first year of James's life was a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Zara had never known she could love something so fiercely, this tiny person who depended on her for everything. Preston was a devoted father, taking over night feedings when he could, playing with James, singing to him in that terrible voice that somehow soothed the baby when nothing else would. The ranch continued to grow. They hired a couple of hands to help with the work, young men from town who were eager to learn the trade. Preston taught them patiently, passing on the skills his own father had taught him. Zara managed the household and the finances, her sharp mind for numbers keeping them profitable even in lean times. When James was 2, Zara found herself pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and in the summer of 1882, their daughter was born. They named her Sarah, after Zara's mother, and she had her mother's dark eyes and sweet disposition. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, of seasons changing and children growing. James was adventurous and bold, always getting into things, while Sarah was more cautious, content to sit and watch the world with thoughtful eyes. Preston and Zara watched them with pride and amazement, marveling at the fact that these beautiful children were theirs. In 1884, when James was 5 and Sarah was 2, they received a letter from Preston's eldest brother. He had seen the announcement of James's birth in a newspaper, tracked down their address, and wanted to reconnect. He wrote that their mother was still alive, living with him on the old ranch in Texas, and that she wanted to meet her grandchildren. Preston held the letter for a long time, his face unreadable. Zara waited, letting him process. Finally, he looked up at her. "Do you think we should go? It is a long journey with 2 small children." "I think," Zara said carefully, "that family is important, and that your mother deserves to know the wonderful man her son became and the family he has built." So they made the journey to Texas, a long, exhausting trip by train and stagecoach with 2 small children in tow. But when they arrived at the old Parker Ranch and Preston's mother saw them coming up the drive, she ran out to meet them, tears streaming down her face. The reunion was emotional and healing. Preston's mother was warm and kind, delighted by her grandchildren, and full of questions about their life in Deadwood. She and Zara bonded quickly, 2 women who understood what it meant to love difficult, stubborn men. Preston reconnected with his brothers, the old hurts fading in the face of shared memories and new understanding. They stayed for 2 weeks, and when it was time to leave, Preston's mother pressed a small bundle into Zara's hands. "This was my mother's," she said. "I want you to have it, to pass down to your children." Inside was a beautiful silver brooch, delicate filigree work that must have been precious to the family. Zara hugged the older woman, grateful for the acceptance and love. Back in Deadwood, life continued. The ranch prospered. Their children grew. In 1886, Zara gave birth to their 3rd child, a boy they named Thomas. In 1888, a 4th child arrived, another daughter named Emma. Their house, which had once seemed so small, expanded with additions built by Preston and his ranch hands, growing to accommodate their growing family. Deadwood itself changed over the years. The wild, rough edges were slowly smoothed away as civilization crept in. More families arrived. Churches and schools were built. The streets were graded and improved. The Running Creek Ranch became one of the most respected operations in the territory, known for quality horses and honest dealing. Through it all, Preston and Zara remained devoted to each other. They still made time for quiet moments together, sitting on the porch after the children were asleep, holding hands and watching the stars. They still made love with the passion of their early days, finding ways to steal private moments despite the chaos of raising 4 children. "Do you ever think about that day I found you in jail?" Preston asked one night as they lay in bed, the house quiet around them. "Sometimes," Zara admitted, "but not with fear anymore. Just gratitude that you were there, that you believed in me when no one else would." I cannot imagine my life without you, he said, pulling her closer. Everything good in my life started the day I met you. Everything good in my life started when you chose to fight for me, she replied. You gave me my freedom, my name, my life, and then you gave me your heart. How could I not love you with everything I have? They kissed in the darkness, a sweet, lingering kiss that spoke of years together and years yet to come. The years rolled on. James grew into a tall, strong young man who loved working with the horses just like his father. Sarah became a talented artist, her sketches and paintings decorating the walls of their home. Thomas was the dreamer, always with his nose in a book, talking about becoming a lawyer. Emma, the baby, was spirited and funny, keeping everyone entertained with her antics. In 1895, when James was 20, he married a sweet girl from town named Catherine. The wedding was held at the ranch, a big, joyous affair with half of Deadwood in attendance. Watching her son take his vows, Zara gripped Preston's hand and thought about their own wedding. So simple and small, and how far they had come since then. A year later, their first grandchild was born, a boy named Peter. Holding him, Zara marveled at the circle of life, at how this tiny baby was part of a legacy that had nearly been destroyed by false accusations and hatred. But love had prevailed, truth had won, and this child, and all the children who would come after him, would grow up in a world made better by the choices she and Preston had made. Sarah married at 22, Thomas at 25. Emma, the independent one, waited until she was 28, choosing a rancher from Montana who reminded Zara so much of a young Preston, it made her heart ache. One by one, their children grew up and moved into their own lives, though they all stayed close, coming back to the Running Creek Ranch for holidays and celebrations. Preston and Zara grew older together, gray creeping into their hair, lines forming on their faces. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it deepened, mellowing like good whiskey, becoming something rich and complex and utterly essential. They had been married for 35 years when Preston woke one morning with pain in his chest. The doctor diagnosed it as heart trouble, warned him to take it easy, to let others do the heavy work. Preston grumbled about it, but he listened, gradually turning over more and more of the ranch operations to James and the other hands. I am not ready to be put out to pasture, he complained to Zara one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset. You are not being put out to pasture, she said, squeezing his hand. You are just being sensible. We have earned the right to slow down a little, enjoy what we have built. What we have built, he repeated, looking out at the ranch, at the distant mountains, at the life they had created together. It is pretty good, is it not? It is perfect, Zara said softly. They sat in comfortable silence, hand in hand, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared. Inside, they could hear the sounds of family, grandchildren laughing, their children's voices raised in conversation. The smell of dinner cooking drifted out from the kitchen. I love you, Zara Parker, Preston said, just as he had said 1,000 times over the years. I love you, Preston Parker, she replied, just as she had 1,000 times before. And in that moment, with the cool evening breeze on their faces and their family close by, they were completely, perfectly happy. Preston lived for another 12 years after his heart trouble began. Years filled with grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with quiet days on the porch and occasional trips into town. He passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 73, Zara beside him, holding his hand just as she had held it through every important moment of their life together. The funeral was massive, the entire town of Deadwood turning out to pay respects to a man who had embodied the best of the West, honest and hardworking and true. Zara stood between her children, dry-eyed and strong, and spoke about the man she had loved for nearly 40 years. He saved my life, she said simply. And then he spent the rest of his life making sure I never regretted being saved. He was my partner, my lover, my best friend. He was a good father and a better grandfather. And every single day we had together was a gift. She lived for 5 more years without him, surrounded by family, telling stories about the old days, about the wild times in early Deadwood, about the cowboy who had believed in her innocence and fought to clear her name. She told the story of their love to anyone who would listen, wanting to make sure it was remembered that the truth of what they had shared would not be lost. When she passed away at 78, she was buried next to Preston on a hill overlooking the Running Creek Ranch, the land they had built together. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren stood around the grave, and James, now a gray-haired man himself, spoke the words his mother would have wanted. They found each other in the darkest time when everything seemed lost, and they built something beautiful out of that darkness. They taught us that love is worth fighting for, that truth matters, that family is everything. Their legacy lives on in all of us, in every choice we make, in every time we stand up for what is right. They were the best of us, and we will never forget them. The sun set over the ranch, golden light spilling across the land, and somewhere in that light, Preston and Zara were together again, young and strong and in love, riding off into a sunset that would never end. Their story became legend in Deadwood, told and retold until it was hard to separate fact from embellishment. But the core truth remained, passed down through generations, that a cowboy had once fought to clear an innocent woman's name, and in doing so had found the love of his life. That justice had prevailed over hatred. That one person, willing to stand up for what was right, could change everything. The Running Creek Ranch remained in the Parker family for over 100 years, each generation adding their own chapter to the story. And on a hill overlooking the ranch, 2 headstones stood side by side, weathered by time but still readable. On one was carved, Preston Parker, beloved husband and father, 1855-1928. On the other, Zara Parker, beloved wife and mother, 1857-1933. And beneath both names, the same inscription, together forever. And they were.